Hi, I hope you're having a good day. This is Gary Zacharias with the Apologist bookshelf. Keller wrote a book called The Reason for God, and it has become just a huge bestseller. I think it's one of the most influential Christian books in maybe the last 100 years. I'd put him right up there with C.S. Lewis. He has a book called The Reason for God, and he's got another one called Making Sense of God. The Reason for God, just to clarify the difference, this one is designed for people who actually believe in God. They're seeking, they have questions, they have challenges. His other book, Making Sense of God, is really for people who maybe are starting a few steps back from that. They're not really sure if there is a God. So, The Reason for God. We have done chapters 1 and 2 already, and they cover some really important things. Let me go to the table of contents here. So, chapter 1 was, well, there can't just be one true religion. And then chapter 2, we did that one in a previous podcast. How could a good God allow suffering? Haven't we heard that a lot? Yes. So I'm going to walk right through the book here, chapter by chapter. Some books I kind of dip in one place and then go someplace else, but this is such a powerful book. I want to walk through it. You can go back and see my other podcasts on it if you want to sometime. He starts off chapter 3, Christianity is a straitjacket. And he has a quote here from somebody apparently that he ran into at one of his meetings who lives in Brooklyn. Of course, Tim Keller's church was in New York City. So here's what Keith said. Christians believe that they have the absolute truth that everyone else has to believe or else. That attitude endangers everyone's freedom. And another person there named Chloe said, yes, the one-truth-fits-all approach is just too confining. The Christians I know don't seem to have the freedom to think for themselves. I believe each individual must determine truth for him or herself. Have we heard that a lot? Yeah. So Keller's asking a key question here. Is belief in absolute truth, which is what Christianity says, is that the enemy of freedom? He said most of the people that he's met in New York City think it is. Why? Well, Christianity says some beliefs are wrong. They're called heresy, and some beliefs or some practices are immoral. And it says, boy, that seems to endanger civic freedom because it puts boundaries on what Christians feel is appropriate. And people are concerned, that divides people. That doesn't unite our population. Also seems to be really culturally narrow these days. I mean, after all, different cultures have different perspectives on reality. And then he says some people feel that set of beliefs enslaves or infantilizes its members, telling them this is what you must believe, this is what you have to practice. And he has a quote here from somebody who said, there's no room for me in that, talking about Christianity. That'd be my death. I don't want to live for God. I will not. I want to live for my own sake. So this woman believed Christianity would stifle creativity and growth. Wow. So freedom, that's what we're all talking about these days. There's no people today, so there's no real purpose for which we were created. So what do? You get freedom. You create your own meaning. You create your own purpose. The Supreme Court came up with something like that when they said the heart of liberty is to define one's own concept of existence, of the meaning of the universe. So based on that, Keller's pointing out Christianity looks like an enemy of cohesion, bringing people together, cultural adaptability, and even authentic personhood. But, and this is where he's going to take that apart, he said, this objection is based on mistakes about what truth is, and what community is, what Christianity is, and even of liberty itself. So he said, you start off, he said, people are saying today, if you make a truth claim, it's a power play. So in other words, you claim, I've got the truth. Well, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get power. You're trying to control other people. So he says, well, wait a minute. The objection that all truth is a power play, that's got a self-inflicting problem there, doesn't it? It falls prey, he says, to the same problem as the objection that all truth is culturally conditioned. He said, you find yourself in an untenable position if you're trying to explain away all assertions of truth. So if you say all truth claims are power plays, that's your statement as well. If you're like Freud that said all truth claims about religion and God are just psychological projections, then so is your statement. Do you see that? Yeah, it's self-refuting. If somebody says to you, there is no truth, you can ask them, is that true? So I think that's a really powerful comment there. Now, what about the idea of community? Christians are accused of having a narrow community. They don't allow everybody to be part of their program. So he said Christianity does require particular beliefs to be a member of its community. It's not open to everybody. Oh, that's socially divisive, critics will say. Common moral beliefs aren't necessary in a liberal democracy. He said, well, wait a minute. Liberal democracy is based on a list of assumptions. A preference, for example, of the individual to community rights, division between private and public morality, the sanctity of personal choice. So that's some assumptions. And all of these beliefs are foreign to many other cultures. I mean, think about that. Liberal democracy like ours is based on a shared set of very particular beliefs. So in our society, the Western society, we have commitments to reason and rights and justice, but there's no universally recognized definition of any of these. So the idea of a totally inclusive community is an illusion. Every human community holds in common some beliefs that create boundaries, and they'll include some people, and they'll exclude others. He said, just here's an example. Imagine that there's a local gay, lesbian, and transgender community center, and that person who's let's say one of the board members says, I've had a religious experience and I believe homosexuality is a sin. Well, imagine a board member says, well, I discovered my son is gay. I think he has a right to marry his partner. Well, the day will come when somebody is going to say, you got to get off this board. You don't share a common commitment with us. So a board member of the Alliance Against Same-Sex Marriage says, my son is gay. I think he has a right to marry his partner. He's going to get booted. The person who's part of the LGBT community says, I think homosexuality is sin. He's going to get booted. So is that okay? Well, each of these organizations and thousands of others are based on common beliefs that act as boundaries. They will include some and they'll exclude others. Neither community is really being narrow. They're just being community. Any community that doesn't hold its members accountable for specific beliefs and practices wouldn't have any identity, really wouldn't be a community. You can't consider a group exclusive just because it has standards for its members. He said maybe there's a better set of tests. And here comes where he's going to deal with Christianity. Which community, think about Christianity and all these other communities out there, which community has beliefs that lead its members to treat people in other communities with love and respect, to serve them and meet their needs? Which communities' beliefs lead it to demonize and attack those who violate their boundaries rather than treating them with kindness, humility, and winsomeness? So it says we shouldn't criticize churches when they maintain standards for membership that's in accord with their beliefs. Every community does that. All right, so here's another challenge. He says Christianity is reputed to be a cultural straitjacket. Why? Because it takes people from all these different cultures and it pushes and prods and mashes them into a single mold. So it seems to be the enemy of pluralism and multiculturalism. But this is what Keller says, I think is an interesting statement. He said, in reality, Christianity is much more adaptive and maybe less destructive of diverse cultures than secularism and other worldviews. He said, think about other world religions, how different the pattern of Christian expansion was. So he says, let's take Islam. So the majority and the center of Islam's population is the Middle East. That's where it got started. The original lands that have been the democratic centers of Hinduism or Buddhism and Confucianism have remained so. But what about Christianity? It first was dominated by Jews. It was in Jerusalem. Then it was dominated by Greek Hellenists. That was in the Mediterranean. Later it was received by the barbarians in Northern Europe, came to be dominated by Western Europeans and then North Americans. He says today most Christians in the world, we think they're all here in America or in England or something, but he says today most Christians live in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. He says Christianity soon is going to be centered in the southern and eastern hemispheres. He says, in fact, if you take something like China, he says at the current rate of growth, within 30 years, Christians will be nearly 1/3 of the Chinese population. He says, why has it grown so much in these places? He says, Christianity says let's take Africa as an example. When Africans become Christians, their Africanness is converted, completed, and resolved. It's not replaced with Europeanness. So he says, secularism is anti-supernatural. It's pushing individualism. He says that's more destructive of local cultures and Africanness than Christianity is. He says, think about the church that Tim Keller runs, Redeemer. He says it attracts and reaches a really diverse urban congregation. I think that's important. So he said, what does Paul talk about in Ephesians chapter 2? He talks about racial diversity. He says the racial diversity of the church is important. That's part of the witness that we're supposed to have. Reinhold Niebuhr said this. He pointed out that irony, amusement at seeing human beings try but fail to be godlike, is a very Christian way of looking at things. Why is Christianity, Keller asked, more than any other major religion, be able to go into so many different, radically different cultures? He said, of course, it's the core of teaching, but he said there's a great deal of freedom in how the absolutes of Christianity can be expressed and take form within a particular culture. For example, he says the Bible says we ought to unite in acts of musical praise, but it doesn't tell us what kind of meter or rhythm or instrumentation. That can be expressed in different cultures. He says there's a historian, Andrew Walls, Walls. He says cultural diversity was built into the Christian faith. In Acts 15, that declared the new Gentile Christians didn't have to enter Jewish culture. The converts had to work out a Hellenistic way of being a Christian, so no one owns the Christian faith. There's no Christian culture the way there's an Islamic culture. So I think that's fascinating there. So he says, contrary to popular opinion, Christianity is not a Western religion that destroys local cultures. It's taken more culturally diverse forms than other faiths. Yeah, so I think that's a really nice point. Now he's got another section here. What about freedom? Christianity is supposed to be a limiting factor on personal growth. It constrains our freedom to choose our own beliefs. What are we hearing today? Freedom to determine our own standards, morality standards, right? It's considered a necessity if you want to be fully human. But that's oversimplified, Keller says. Actually, being confined and being constrained can be a means to liberation. So, for example, let's say you like music, you want to learn the piano. What are you going to do? You're going to end up sitting there practicing and practicing and practicing week after week after week. That's a restriction. That's a limit, isn't it, on your freedom? But if you have the talent, though, the discipline and that limitation's going to unleash your ability that otherwise would be untapped. So disciplines and constraints liberate us only when they fit with the reality of our nature and capacities. So in many areas of life, Keller says, freedom is not the absence of restrictions, is finding the right restrictions, the liberating restrictions. So he said, if we only grow intellectually, vocationally, and physically through judicious constraints, why wouldn't it be true for spiritual and moral growth? So he said the popular idea that we were supposed to determine our morality is based on the idea that the spiritual realm is nothing like the rest of the world. He says, does anyone really believe that? He said, one of the more frequent statements he's heard is, well, every person has to define right and wrong for him or herself. And Keller says he always responds by saying, is there anyone in the world right now doing things you believe they should stop doing, no matter what they personally believe about the correctness of their behavior? Well, they'll say yes. Then Keller says he'd ask them, doesn't that mean that you do believe there's some kind of moral reality that's there that we don't define, that we have to abide by, regardless of what a person feels or thinks? He says, so why do we have this moral, spiritual reality we have to acknowledge to thrive? What is the environment that liberates us if we confine ourselves to it? He says, love. That's the liberating freedom loss of all. Now think about that. If you fall in love with a friend or romantic love, you lose independence to attain greater intimacy, don't you? You can't enter a deep relationship and still just do your own decisions, or allow your friend or lover no say in how you live your life. So if you want to experience joy and freedom of love, you give up some personal autonomy. There's no doubt about that. He says, Francois Sagan, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, here's what she had to say. You've had the freedom you wanted? And she said, yes. I was obviously less free when I was in love with someone, but one's not in love all the time. Apart from that, I'm free. And so Sagan is right, Keller says. A love relationship certainly does limit your personal options, no doubt about it. C.S. Lewis said this. By the way, this is one thing I really like about Keller. He's got so many quotes from interesting people, well-known, sometimes not so well-known. But of course, everybody's got a C.S. Lewis quote somewhere. So here's his. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. He said, it'll become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. Yeah. Freedom, then, he says, back to Keller, it's not the absence of limitation and the constraints. You want to find the right ones that fit our nature and actually liberate us. So that's really important. I'm so glad that he mentioned that. So for a love relationship to be healthy, there's going to be mutual loss of independence. Both sides have to say to the other, I'll adjust to you. I'll change for you. I'll serve you, even though it means a sacrifice for me. If one of the two does all the sacrificing, the other does all the ordering, then that's exploitative. It's going to oppress people. Now, some people say, well, a relationship with God seems dehumanizing. It's going to be one way. It's got to be God's way. He's the divine being. He'll snap his fingers and we're going to jump. We have to adjust to God, people say. There's no way God could adjust to and serve me. He said, that may be true in other religions and other beliefs in God. He said, that's not true in Christianity. Why? I bet you know where this is going. Keller says, in the most radical way possible, God did adjust to us. How? His incarnation and atonement. I mean, think about what happened. As Jesus Christ, he became a limited human being. He was vulnerable to terrible things, suffering and death. And then he went to the cross. He submitted to our condition as a sinner and died in our place to forgive us. So he says, in the most profound way, this is what God said to us in Christ. I will adjust to you. I will change for you. I'll serve you, though it means a sacrifice for me. So he says, well, if God was willing to do that for us, we should say the same to God and others. Yeah, he quotes Paul here in 2 Corinthians 5. The love of Christ constrains us. Someone once asked C.S. Lewis, is it easy to love God? And he said, it's easy to those who do it. Now, that sounds pretty paradoxical, doesn't it? Sound like a Zen answer. But he said, it's back to Keller, he said, when you fall deeply in love, you want to please the beloved. You don't wait for the person to ask you to do something. You research, you learn every little thing that brings that person pleasure, and then you get it for her, even if it costs money or time or some kind of inconvenience. It's your wish is my command, you feel, and that doesn't seem oppressive at all. Now, some people on the outside look at that and say, boy, she's leading him around by the nose, but from the inside it feels like heaven. So he says for a Christian, it's the same with Jesus. The love of Christ does constrain. But once you realize how Jesus changed for you and gave himself for you, you're not afraid of giving up your freedom, and therefore you find true freedom in him. So that's the end of his chapter there. Great book. Washington Post says it's a tight, accessible case for reasoned religious belief. Rick Warren says, this is a book I give to all my friends who are serious spiritual seekers. Christianity Today says Keller will be remembered as a pioneer of the new urban Christians. Library Journal says convincing, refreshing, an excellent conversation starter. This book presents a valid, well-written, and well-researched argument. Now, no doubt about that. Now, I'll say this because I want to be honest here, that I don't agree with Keller on everything. There's some issues that I do have some issues with him about, but that's okay. I mean, overall, I think he's really done a wonderful thing going into a heart of secularism, New York City, and establishing a church. And he is responding to the hunger that's there and the hunger that's in the urban person as well as the person on the outside of major cities. He's appealing to the witty, to the sophisticated, as well as to the ones who are not that way. So I very much appreciated his ministry, and it's going to have an impact continue even though he's gone. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you're having a good day, and we'll do another podcast soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.